I walked out. He was standing there soaked from the rain, eyes burning, chest heaving like he'd run through the entire city to reach her. I walked out of the meeting. I told them I'd rather lose everything than lose myself, than lose you. She stared at him, heart stilled. Are you insane? No, he said, stepping forward. I'm in love with you. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with roses or a perfect plan. Sometimes it shows up soaking wet at your door, choosing you over a world of expectations. And sometimes that is where everything begins. If you're someone who believes in slow love, honest words, and the kind of story that grows gently into forever, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this journey. Because what you're about to hear is not just a love story. It's a story about finding a home in someone's eyes. Let's begin. Lyla Quinn hadn't expected her evening to begin with her 75-year-old grandmother stepping out in a midnight blue gown that shimmered like starlight and end beneath the chandeliers of the grandest ballroom in East Markley. Yet somehow there she was, clutching a clutch that barely held a lipstick and a breath mint, teetering slightly in heels borrowed from a friend, and wondering if anyone else could hear the tremble in her chest. "Stop tugging at your dress, love," Celeste Quinn whispered, her voice warm like velvet. "You look as if you're about to be sold to the highest bidder." Lyla laughed under her breath, though the sound came out tight. "I feel like I'm moonlighting as a guest at someone else's coronation. You're here because I asked you, and that's enough," her grandmother replied with a wink. "Besides, the Markley Society still has my name carved on its walls, whether anyone remembers or not." The Markley Winter Benefit was not a place people stumbled into. It was silk and legacy, whispered names and seven-figure donations. It was champagne poured without asking, and music that never stopped. People didn't attend, they belonged. Lyla didn't belong. Not by blood, not by bank account. She worked 3 part-time jobs, wrote quietly in the evenings, and sometimes calculated whether to pay rent or refill her grandmother's medication. First, she came tonight for one reason: Celeste. And for Celeste, Lyla would have walked barefoot into any ballroom in the world. But as she stepped through the carved arch and into the hall, she paused. It was stunning. The chandeliers hung like frozen constellations. The walls, trimmed in ivory and gold, echoed soft string music. The scent in the air was some combination of peonies and generational wealth. She stood still the way you do when you're afraid to wrinkle the room. "You have more right to be here than half of them," Celeste murmured gently, looping her arm through Lyla's. "You carry history, even if your shoes pinch." Lyla offered a small smile. "Maybe you do. I'm just the shadow beside you." Her grandmother leaned in. "You'd be surprised what shadows become." When the light shifts, Lyla didn't have time to question what that meant, because that's when she saw him. At the far end of the ballroom near the marble bar, he stood tall, statuesque, somehow still in a room full of movement. His suit was quiet, black tailored like it had grown with him. His dark hair was imperfect in a purposeful way, and his jaw held the kind of stillness that drew silence, but it was his gaze that stilled her breath. Steel gray, unapologetic. Fixed entirely on her. He didn't blink. He didn't turn away when someone approached him with a hesitant smile and murmured, "Damian Hale." Of course, the name felt like a headline. Damian Hale, tech titan venture magnate, the kind of man who made empires before most people figured out their morning coffee order. He wasn't just known, he was whispered about. And now he was walking toward her. Panic lit her chest. "Excuse me," she muttered, already stepping away. "I just need a breath." Lyla Celeste began, but she was already gone. She stepped through the open terrace doors, letting the cold night air wrap around her like armor. Out here, the music dulled, the world paused. She leaned against the stone railing, breath unsteady. She had come to disappear into a crowd she had not expected to be seen. The night air nipped at Lyla's bare shoulders as she stood on the terrace, her fingers gripping the cold stone railing like it might steady her breath. The music inside had faded into a distant hum, replaced by the slow rhythm of her pulse. Then footsteps, deliberate but unhurried. "You're not exactly subtle," a voice said behind her, low and smooth like the end of a jazz note. She turned, and there he was, Damian Hale, standing less than a few feet away. Less myth, more man, and somehow still the sort of presence that made the rest of the world blur. "I wasn't trying to be," she replied, lifting her chin as if bravery could be borrowed for a moment. His mouth curved slightly. "Good. I prefer people who don't pretend." "Is that rare where you're from?" she asked. "It's rare everywhere," he said, "especially in rooms like this." There was no charm in his tone, just honesty, and that strangely disarmed her more than any practiced flirtation ever could. "Well, I'm not here to impress anyone," she said. "I'm just the granddaughter of someone important enough to still get invited." He looked at her like she'd missed the point entirely. "I saw you walk in," he said, "in a sea of people rehearsing how they look and laugh. You actually felt something that's rare." Lyla studied him, unsure how to absorb the words, and what would someone like you know about feeling anything? A brief laugh escaped him, not mocking but almost surprised. "Less than I should, but I'm trying." She didn't know what this was. A curiosity, a game, a mistake. Probably all three. She forced a polite smile. "I should go find my grandmother." As she turned, his voice stopped her. "I'm not playing." She froze. "I don't usually start conversations like this. I don't chase people across terraces," he said. "But you walked in tonight and I couldn't look away." "I won't lie and pretend I didn't notice." Lyla slowly turned back. "If you walk away now, I'll respect that," he continued. "But I'd like to see you again, just once coffee dinner, whatever you'd allow." She hesitated. Just for a second, then said Lyla. He smiled. Not like a billionaire, not like a headline, but like a man who had just been handed something rare. "Lyla," he repeated. "That's beautiful. I'm still leaving," she said, though her voice had softened. He nodded. "I'll be here a while." She walked back into the ballroom, her heart unsteady, like a song changing tempo. Halfway through. Back at the table, Celeste raised one eyebrow. "You were gone quite a while." "Don't," Lyla said, sitting down. "I wasn't going to." Her grandmother replied, lips twitching. "But if that man stares any harder, he might burn a hole through your dress." Lyla tried not to turn, but she did. And there he was, still at the bar, still watching, still smiling. The next morning, Lyla tried to dismiss the whole thing. A chance conversation, a strange moment. Nothing more, until a sleek black car rolled to the curb outside her apartment. A man in a suit stepped out holding a small white envelope. "For Miss Lyla Quinn," he said simply. "That's me," she managed. He handed her the envelope and walked away. Inside was a single cream-colored card, its edges pressed in gold foil. Dinner 8 o'clock. The Marlo room. "I hope you'll come. Damian." She stared at it for a long moment. And then, before reason could talk her out of it, she whispered to herself, "What am I doing?" But deep down she knew the truth. She wanted to see him again, not for his name, not for the money, not even for the mystery, but because when he looked at her, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like a guest. She felt seen. She didn't remember pressing the elevator button. But there she was, standing in front of it, fingers curled around the ivory card heart, pulsing like a second heartbeat in her throat. Her dress, a vintage silk gown in the softest shade of rose, had once belonged to her grandmother. It cinched at the waist and moved like a whisper each time she exhaled. Her hair was swept up, though her hands had trembled the whole time she pinned it. The lipstick had been redone twice, the eyeliner once, maybe twice. She had no idea what she was walking into. So she walked anyway. When the elevator opened, a host was already waiting, elegant, expressionless, who led her past velvet drapes and down a hushed hallway. Then came a curtain, and beyond it, a room that flickered gold with candlelight. There was only one table, 2 chairs, and Damian Hale standing tall in a navy suit collar, open sleeves pushed slightly back like time had passed, and he didn't care who saw it. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked like he'd been waiting. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said gently. "You invited me?" she replied, voice lighter than she expected it to be. "That doesn't always mean yes," he said, but I hoped Lyla took a cautious step inside. The space felt more like a memory than a restaurant. Quiet jazz spilled from a vintage record player in the corner. The scent of something warm and buttery lingered in the air, and tall windows, half draped in ivory, whispered with the city's hush. "I thought this would be louder," she said, glancing around. "I didn't want spectacle." He replied, "I wanted something that let you breathe." She didn't know how to answer that, so she didn't. He pulled out her chair. She sat. A waiter appeared like a breath-filled 2 flutes with something golden, then disappeared again without a sound. Lyla stared at the glass. "I don't really drink. You don't have to," Damian said. She took a sip anyway. It was dry, almost floral. It didn't taste like money. It tasted like restraint. She placed it back down carefully. "So what exactly is this?" He didn't blink. "Dinner. With someone I haven't been able to stop thinking about for 2 days. Her brow lifted. "Is that how you approach women? Notes and champagne?" He smiled faintly. "I don't usually approach anyone." She tilted her head. "Do you expect me to believe that I expect you to believe I wouldn't lie to you?" The quiet that followed was heavier than silence. Then the waiter returned, placing before them a dish so delicate it looked painted ribbons of cucumber. Something creamy, something truffled, too perfect to be real. He waited until the server left before speaking again. "You looked ready to bolt the second. I took a step toward you the other night, I was." Lyla admitted, "I thought maybe you were about to call security." He laughed softly. "That would have been a first. I just don't belong in places like that," she said before she could stop herself. But he didn't blink, didn't scoff, just asked, "Then where do you belong?" She blinked. "What I mean it," he said simply. "If not there, then where? What feels like home to you?" It wasn't the kind of question people usually asked. Not her, not ever. "I don't know," she said after a pause. "Somewhere quiet, with books, light through a window. Nothing that requires heels or pretending to laugh." He nodded. "Sounds like the kind of world I'd trade for." She looked up. "And what about you? Where's home?" But he didn't answer. Not right away. Damian didn't answer her question right away. Instead, he lifted his glass and traced the rim with the tip of his finger as if the shape of it might contain an easier truth than the one he was about to give. "I've spent years sitting at tables with people who'd trade their own children for a better seat in the boardroom," he said finally. "I've laughed at jokes that made my stomach turn, smiled at men I wouldn't trust to hold a door, let alone a promise." His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "I built everything I have so I wouldn't have to answer to those people," he continued. "But somehow, I still end up in their rooms." Lyla watched him, something softening behind her ribs. "Then why stay?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze, then not guarded this time, not polished, just real. Because walking away is easy. But walking away alone, that's harder. And I haven't met many people who'd leave with me. She didn't speak, didn't need to. "But you," he added. "You walked into that ballroom like the whole place spoke a language. You didn't care to learn. And instead of pretending, you stepped outside, I didn't think anyone noticed, she admitted I did. Their food arrived, pan-seared duck glazed in something dark and fragrant for him, a delicate lemon basil pasta for her that looked too beautiful to eat. She took a bite and closed her eyes. "Oh no," she whispered. "I think I just fell in love with a noodle." Damian laughed, really laughed. The sound was warm and unguarded, like it had been waiting to be let out for years. Something in her chest ached at the sound. They talked. Not about empires or apps or inheritance. Not about charity galas or press headlines. They talked about scent memories, fresh bread, old books, the way the air smelled before rain. They argued over the best terrible movies and confessed the strangest reasons they'd ever cried. He told her he once shattered a hotel lamp after losing a chess match as a teenager. She told him she once walked out of a blind date because the guy had said, without a hint of irony, "I hate dogs." By the time dessert arrived, a small crème brûlée dusted with lavender, Lyla had almost forgotten he was Damian Hale. Almost. But reality returned later when they stepped outside the hotel. A sleek black car was already waiting. The driver stepped forward and opened the door with the kind of elegance you couldn't fake. Damian turned to her. "I'd like to see you again," he said. Lyla hesitated. Her mind raced with all the reasons she shouldn't, that this wasn't her world, that he wasn't supposed to want someone like her. "This feels easy," she said. "But it shouldn't. You're you and you," he said gently, "are exactly who you're supposed to be." She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said, voice almost a whisper. "I'll call you." "You don't have my number," he replied, smiling. "Just enough I will," she said. He didn't kiss her, didn't touch her. He just looked at her like she was something he hadn't expected but knew somehow was real. The next morning, Lyla opened her door and found a single white rose on the step. No note, no signature, just the flower. And something inside her shifted, not because of him, but because of how she felt. Present scene. The next time she saw him, it wasn't behind tinted glass or at another glittering venue. It was in the bookstore. She was kneeling behind the counter, sorting through a stack of old poetry books when the bell above the door rang with its usual indifference. She didn't look up right away. Most people who came in at that hour knew what they wanted. They didn't ask questions. Then a voice, low, familiar, cut through the silence. "Do you carry first editions?" Her heart skipped. She looked up, and there he was, Damian Hale. Again, he stood there, one hand tucked casually into the pocket of a charcoal wool coat, the other trailing along the edge of a dusty bookshelf, as if he belonged among first editions and forgotten spines. Damian Hale. In a bookstore that barely had a functioning heater and still smelled faintly of old coffee and lemon cleaner. "You're kidding," Lyla said, standing slowly from behind the counter. "I'm not," he replied, unbothered by the absurdity of it. "You said you liked quiet places with books. So I found one." She crossed her arms, trying to suppress the storm forming under her ribs. "You tracked down where I work. I asked your grandmother. That paused her. She gave you the address. She said you'd be here sometime between noon and 4. I didn't tell her why." Lyla narrowed her eyes. "So, why are you here?" He stepped closer, but gently, like he knew how to leave space. "Because you said yes. That night, you said you'd call. I didn't want that moment to fade into one of those things people only mean halfway." She stared at him. "You thought showing up unannounced while I'm covered in bookstore dust would be charming." "No," he said. "I thought it would be honest." She should have told him to leave. Pointed toward the creaky door and returned to alphabetizing worn paperbacks. But instead, she reached beneath the counter, pulled out a faded copy of The Great Gatsby, and handed it to him. "If you're going to linger, you might as well help. That goes in the back. Classic fiction." He didn't flinch. He just took the book, walked toward the shelf, and placed it gently between two others, as if they were old friends. She followed him, arms still crossed, heart still beating too fast. "I didn't think you'd come looking," she said softly. "I didn't expect you to say yes," he replied. They stood there surrounded by stories older than either of them, in a quiet lit only by weak window light and floating dust. "You said you wanted to see me again?" she added. "I did. I do. And I meant it. Most men say that after dessert and never follow through. I'm not most men." She studied his face. "Then what are you, Damian?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "I'm someone who's tired of transactions, of dinners that end in silence and partnerships that come with clauses." He took a breath. "I'm looking for something that can't be bought." Her chest tightened, but she masked it. "Not yet. I'm not an escape," she said carefully. "I'm not asking you to be." "Then what are you asking for?" He paused. "Time." After a moment, she nodded. "Once." "Fine. But if you're going to keep showing up here, you're helping me reorganize the vintage classics. It's a disaster back there. I've been told I'm good at fixing disasters. You've never seen this storage closet. I'm not scared." She led him past a crooked door that stuck on the left side into a cramped back room full of leaning towers of mismatched books, a creaky desk stained with coffee rings, and a single lamp that flickered like it was thinking about quitting. He rolled up his sleeves. "Where do we start?" 2 hours passed. By the time they emerged, the vintage classics section looked like it had been curated by a small literary museum. Damian had worked with a kind of quiet precision that surprised her, muttering author names under his breath, checking spines and publication years, like they meant something to him. When he left, he didn't ask for her number. He simply said, "I'll be back tomorrow." And he was, every day that week. No entourage, no noise. Just him in jeans and a coat that probably cost more than her rent, showing up like he had nowhere else more important to be. He lifted boxes, he shelved poetry. He listened as she ranted about customers who cracked spines and folded corners like it didn't matter. And little by little he let her see pieces of him. He told her about the very first company he built. He told her one afternoon as they were sorting through a crate of poetry chapbooks that the night he sold his first company, he ate instant noodles alone on his office floor. Not out of frugality, but because he had no one to call. He told her his mother had passed before she ever saw him succeed, that sometimes when people congratulated him, all he wanted was to hear her voice saying, "I'm proud of you." He said he hated how people looked at him like a walking brand, how even kindness when offered to him felt like strategy. And in return, Lyla told him about the first piece of writing that made her cry, an essay about trees that had nothing to do with trees. She told him about the years she'd spent making up imaginary lives for strangers on subways just to feel less alone. She told him how sometimes in her quietest moments she wondered if holding on to her dreams was just a prettier way of giving up on something more real. One afternoon, he brought her a warm croissant from a tiny cafe she had mentioned weeks earlier, a place tucked away near a florist and barely marked from the street. "I remembered," he said simply, when she blinked in surprise. Another day, he gently handed a customer their dropped keys before she could, with only a soft, "Be careful," and a smile. He never made it about him, never made it a show. He just stayed. Until one evening, as Lyla was locking up the shop, the streetlights flickering on one by one, he asked quietly, "Can I take you somewhere?" She turned the key in the lock, uncertain. Where he didn't answer, he just held out his hand. The car that waited at the curb was black, silent, and far too sleek for her street. Inside the seats were soft leather, the kind that exhaled when you sat down. Music played, not loud, not meant to impress, just quiet jazz with a pulse that matched the rhythm of her thoughts. They didn't speak. The city passed by in a blur of amber and motion. When the car finally stopped, it was in front of a tall building with a doorman who greeted Damian by name and held the door open without question. He led her upstairs, and then onto a rooftop, but not the kind from movies. No rooftop bar, no neon lights, just a garden quiet green wrapped in strings of golden fairy lights. In the center, a table for two, set with care waiting. A single violinist played something slow in the corner, notes rising into the night air like prayers. Lyla turned in a slow circle, breath-catching. I thought Damian said gently, "You might need a night that didn't ask anything of you." She looked at the table, her favorite dish. A wine from the same vineyard she once mentioned. She'd always wanted to try but had never tasted. Her voice caught. "How did you—" I listened. She walked to the edge of the rooftop where the skyline stretched in every direction, shimmering like someone had poured stars into the windows. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quietly. "I'm not," he replied, stepping beside her. "I'm just offering you space to exhale." She turned to him, eyes searching. "You make it very hard not to fall." His voice was barely a whisper. "Then don't fight it." When he kissed her, it wasn't fireworks or hunger. It was gentle, intentional. The kind of kiss that said, "I see you, not just your beauty, but your loneliness, your fire, your ache, and I'm still here." Later she stood barefoot in the middle of Damian's penthouse toes, curling into the thick, pale carpet hands, still tingling from the moment he'd held them in the elevator. Floor-to-ceiling windows surrounded her. Outside, the city sparkled like fireflies trapped in glass. But it wasn't the view that stilled her. It was the silence, not the hollow kind, the sacred kind, the kind that came from being above the noise, from being with someone who expected nothing but presence. "You all right?" he asked from across the room, loosening the cuffs of his shirt. She turned slowly, taking in the soft lighting, the minimal furniture that somehow felt like home instead of display. "You live here alone." "For years," he said. She walked toward the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "It doesn't feel lonely." "It is," he replied. He didn't move, didn't try to bridge the silence with touch or words. Instead, he let the stillness settle between them, not as an absence but as a kind of understanding. A shared breath neither needed to explain. Lyla turned to face him, her voice quieter now. "People must always be trying to get close to you. How do you know who's real?" Damian's gaze didn't shift. "I watch who stays when I say no." "No to what?" He took a slow step forward, the city lights washing over his face. "No to favors, no to hidden agendas, no to pretending that nothing gets to me." "And if someone didn't come looking for anything at all?" she asked. He held her eyes. "Then I'd ask them to stay." She didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, she drifted into the kitchen, letting her fingers trace the cool stone edge of the island as if anchoring herself in something tangible. "You cook?" she asked, opening a drawer that looked more like a surgeon's kit than a utensil tray. "Tried once," he said with a smirk, nearly set off the fire suppression system. She laughed a quiet, unexpected sound and reached for a ceramic mug. "You ever think about disappearing?" "Often," he said, "but not from everything, just from the noise." She turned toward him, mug in hand. "Coffee." He nodded. "Cabinet above the sink. Good beans are in the back." The simplicity of the task felt strangely grounding. Her dress whispered as she moved, catching light with every step. She brewed the coffee in silence, the aroma curling through the room like a memory. When she handed him the mug, he didn't look at the cup. He looked at her, like the shape of her fingers on porcelain meant something. Like all of this meant something. She settled onto the edge of the leather chaise legs tucked beneath her. "Tell me something no one knows." He leaned against the window, took a sip, then said, "I used to write songs." Her brows lifted. "Seriously terrible ones," he added with a grin. "I never showed anyone. Still have the notebook, though. Buried in the back of my closet. I keep it to remind myself. I used to dream before I started calculating. She smiled behind the rim of her cup. You're more poetic than I expected. I'm more everything than people expect, he replied. Most of them don't bother to look past the headlines. She set the mug down carefully. Why me? Because you never asked for anything, he said. I didn't think I could. Exactly. She stood again, walked to the window and pressed her palm to the cold glass. I don't know how to exist in your world. You don't have to, he said softly from behind her. Just exist in mine. She turned slowly. Is there a difference? There is, he said, taking a step closer when you're the only part of it that feels real. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. I don't want to be a distraction. You're not. You're the only thing that makes sense. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was whole. Then his phone buzzed. Once. Then again. He didn't move. She stepped back slightly. You should get that. He glanced at the screen, sighed. It's my board. They want me in London. Tomorrow, for a meeting I never agreed to. Her arms crossed instinctively. Are you going? I don't want to. Then don't. It's not that simple. She waited. He looked down, then met her gaze again. They think I'm distracted, that I've lost my edge because of me. No, he said. Because I stopped saying yes to every single demand. She walked back to the couch slower this time. What happens if you don't go? They'll escalate. Call a vote. I hold the largest share, but that only buys me time. They want control, and if they get it, they'll rip apart everything I've built. She was quiet for a long while, then said simply, Then go. His eyes darkened, not in anger, but in the kind of pain that came from being seen too clearly. What he asked barely above a whisper. Go. Lyla said gently. Go to London. Do what you have to do. Handle what they're trying to take from you. I don't want to leave you. You're not leaving me, she said. You're just doing what men like you are built to do. I'm not like them. No, she said softly. But you're still one of them, and pretending otherwise doesn't make it untrue. He moved closer, then dropped to his knees in front of her, something raw and unguarded in his face. I've never met anyone like you. She reached out, touching his jaw, the way one touches something they're afraid might vanish. Then prove it, she whispered. Build a life. Someone like me can exist in not as decoration, not in shadow, but fully. He nodded once, as if something inside him had hardened into resolve. I'll be back, he said. 3 days. I'll be here. He kissed her. Then, not like a goodbye, but like a memory he wanted to last. And then he left. The next few days passed like smoke, visible, but impossible to hold. Lyla moved through them mechanically, opening the bookstore, checking in with her grandmother, shelving arrivals, boiling tea leaves she forgot to drink. But everything echoed. Every task. Every room. His absence wasn't quiet. It was loud. On the 4th morning, as clouds pressed low and rain slicked the sidewalk, a loud knock shattered the silence. She looked up from the register. There he was, soaked, breathless, very much alive. She rushed to the door, unlocking it with trembling hands. Damian, I walked out of the meeting, he said, voice burning. I sat there while they tried to reduce everything I've built to numbers and leverage, and I realized the only thing I wanted was to be back here with you. You're soaked, she said, her hand landing on his chest. His shirt clung to his skin. I'd stand through a storm for you. She pulled him inside. He cupped her face with cold hands, kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. I want more than a name, he said against her skin. I want us, a life one where we're building something real, not around each other, with each other. She couldn't speak, could only nod. Then he stepped back and reached into his coat. A small velvet box. Her breath hitched. No, she said instinctively. retreating. "I know it soon," he said quickly. "I know this might be madness, but it's the first thing I've been sure of in years." She stared at him. Not the wealth, not the fame him. "It's not about rings or penthouses or grand gestures." He said, "It's you. It's how quiet the world gets when you speak, how you never once asked for anything and gave me more than anyone ever has." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, the kind that would never go out of style. "I don't want a headline," he said. "I want a home." She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, kissed him hard and slow, then whispered, "Let's go home." Months later, the bookstore had 2 names on the deed. Its wooden floors had been sanded smooth and polished. The windows sparkled with afternoon light. In the corner, Celeste sat with a book and a cup of tea, watching her granddaughter laugh behind the counter as Damian gently reached for her hand. There was no gala, no spotlight, just warmth, a quiet life, built page by page. In a city that never paused, Lyla had found something still. Someone who saw her, not just once, but over and over again. The rain had stopped an hour earlier, but the pavement still shimmered, turning the streets into mirrors for city lights and cafe signs. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee mixed with old pages and the golden glow of the reading lamps made everything feel like it belonged. Lyla was unpacking a new shipment of rare poetry books when she heard the bell over the door. She didn't need to look up. "Let me guess," she said, glancing at the clock. "You brought pastries I didn't ask for." "You brought pastries again," Lyla said without looking up, lips already lifting into a smile. "And let me guess," she added, glancing up. "You're about to suggest I take the afternoon off." Damian leaned casually against the front counter, a paper bag in one hand, a folded folder in the other, croissants and mild coercion. "It's a tried-and-true combination." She raised an eyebrow, closing the book in front of her. "Is that how you built a tech empire? Butter and charm?" He set the bag down with a grin. "No. But it's how I'm going to get you to come outside with me. Just 20 minutes. And why exactly would I do that?" He opened the folder, slid it gently toward her. Lyla unfolded the paper inside a single page. Her name printed at the top. She read it once. Twice. Her voice was suddenly softer. "You're serious? I bought the building," Damian said. "The entire block, actually. It's under a preservation trust now. No one can tear it down. Not now, not ever." She blinked. "You didn't have to do that, I know," he replied. "But I wanted you to know, this place is safe now. Your world doesn't have to feel temporary anymore." She walked around the counter and stood in front of him, her hands finding his. "You keep doing things no one's ever done for me." "I'm not trying to impress you," he said, voice low. "I'm trying to build something with you." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still held its memory, cool, quiet, expectant. He led her just past the bookstore door beneath the glow of a lone street lamp. Then, without a word, Damian reached into his coat pocket and knelt. Her breath caught Lyla. He said, lifting a small box voice, steady, but full of something fragile, something sacred. "The night I saw you for the first time, I didn't know what was happening, but I felt it. Like something had shifted. Like I wasn't alone in the room anymore." Tears rimmed her eyes. "You didn't ask for any of this," he continued. "You didn't chase it or change for it or play along. You were just you. And suddenly I wanted to be more, not for the headlines, not for the world. For you." She lowered her hand from her mouth, her whole body trembling, not from doubt but from the magnitude of being chosen. "I don't want a love that fits into a schedule." He said, "I want a love that redefines the map. A love that's inconvenient, untamed, and true. I want you always have." He opened the box. "Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He stood and slipped the ring onto her hand. then kissed her with the kind of certainty that made everything else traffic. Buildings' time fall away. The weeks that followed unfolded not like fantasy, but like foundation. They chose their new life together over coffee mugs with chipped rims, while surrounded by boxes of books and laughter that echoed between bare walls. No headlines, no cathedral aisles, just real. They didn't want a wedding that looked good in pictures, they wanted one that felt like them. So they picked the bookstore. Chairs were tucked between the poetry shelves and the quiet strength of the history section. Celeste wore deep navy and carried a bouquet of gardenias she'd arranged herself. Damian stood at the front, fingers fidgeting slightly, until Lyla appeared. She didn't walk down an aisle. She walked toward him, and that made all the difference. Their vows weren't recited from memory, they weren't perfect, but they were true. "I didn't know peace," she said softly, looking up at him, "until I found you. I didn't know I could be seen and not edited. You made me stop waiting. For someday. For more. Because suddenly everything I wanted was already here." Damian's voice cracked when he answered. "I used to believe love had to be earned with power, with control, with proving he reached for her hand. But you taught me that real love doesn't ask to be earned. It just asks to be kept. You made me believe," Damian whispered, "that love doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true." His words, simple but sure, floated into the space between them. The same space where they now stood, beneath a strand of soft fairy lights surrounded by books, and the few people who had always mattered. No orchestra, no chandeliers, just his hand in hers and a future that no longer felt like a fragile maybe, but a promise written in quiet ink. Long after the last guest had left, after the chairs were stacked and the glasses half emptied, they stayed barefoot on the bookstore's worn wooden floor, slow dancing in the hush of their new beginning. Damian pressed his chin to the top of her head. "This place has always been your sanctuary." Lyla looked up, her eyes gentle. "Now it's ours." Months passed. The city did what cities do, shifted, pushed, pulsed forward. Deals were made, calendars filled, plans changed, but Lyla and Damian carved out a rhythm of their own, quiet, deliberate, alive. Mornings began with her curled into his side, reading aloud from a novel pulled at random from the shelf. Afternoons drifted into long hours at the bookstore, sometimes working in silence, sometimes debating Austen versus Bronte, like the question had never mattered more. Damian stepped back from a handful of his ventures, not to vanish, but to stay, to build something slower, something intentional. He launched a foundation, one rooted in preserving independent creative spaces, forgotten bookstores, neighborhood theaters, corner libraries with creaky stairs and untold stories. Lyla helped craft every reading program. Her name appeared on every flyer, but she never stopped working the counter. Never stopped painting the window, displays herself, never stopped tucking handwritten notes into customers' favorite books. She always kept one chair empty in the corner, just in case someone needed to sit down and remember how to breathe. They traveled sometimes, not for appearances, not for spotlight, but for wonder. They sipped tea in centuries-old cafes, wandered remote mountain libraries, and always brought home stories like souvenirs, pieces of the world stitched into their own. One evening, as dusk stretched itself across the skyline like a soft exhale, Lyla stood on their rooftop city lights, blinking awake below. Damian joined her in silence, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. She leaned back into him. "How I used to think love needed chaos, that if it didn't hurt, it wasn't real." She paused. "But this feels like breathing." He kissed her shoulder, "Because we built it together." She turned to face him, eyes full of something that glowed. "I want to write again." He didn't hesitate. "Then do it. I want to write about everything she said, about how you walked into the bookstore that day, how you never made me feel like I had to shrink, How you look at me like I'm not the question, but the answer. He rested his forehead gently against hers. Then write it all, he whispered. Just don't change the ending. She smiled. Why not? Because he said it's perfect. And they stood there wrapped in the kind of quiet that doesn't fade even after the page turns, a love not made for display but for keeping, not hurried, not loud, just true, just home forever. In the end, there were no grand declarations, no fireworks, just two people standing quietly on a rooftop wrapped in the kind of love that didn't need to be loud, only true. Because real love doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it's a warm mug of coffee, a shared silence, a hand that stays. And when someone looks at you like you're not a question, but the answer, you don't run. You stay. If this story moved you, even just a little, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who believes in quiet love, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that speak to the heart. Thank you for being here. Until the next story, stay kind, stay brave, and never stop believing in the beauty of slow things.